Good morning or good afternoon, as we are just moving into. We're just waiting for a couple more people who are just joining, and then we'll get started. So hopefully you can see the shared screen, and we're going to be talking about autism in the workplace today. I'm just going to say from the start, I'll just wait for just a couple more people to join. Okay, so today is a very light touch about autism, and I just want to stress that this is not a training session on autism, and we would advise that you got some trainers in to talk about autism in detail because that will give you a lot more background knowledge to it. So today we're just going to be looking at more like the light touch and giving you some ideas of how to support people in the workplace. So this is the agenda that we're going through within the next hour. So what we're delivering on today is coming from the Bedfordshire Autism Voice project that we're working on. So we're going to be talking about what that is, why the need to have these sessions, very brief look at what autism is, and then the main of it is how to support your autistic employees. So we're going to start off with what is Bedfordshire Autism Voice. So this is all based around the autism strategy, the National Autism Strategy. And we are working in collaboration with Bedford Borough Council and Central Bedford Council to talk to autistic adults to find out what their issues are that need dealing with, how to make their lives better, which is all part of what the autism strategy is about. Previously, there was a thing called Autism Partnership Board, and a review was carried out, and it was found that there wasn't a lot of feedback in from the autistic adults locally. So the Bedfordshire Autism Voice was created out of that. So when we're looking at the National Autism Strategy, this is why today is important. This is legislation. It's the only specific disability legislation around. It came into being in 2009. And the current strategy, part of it is looking at employment. And I've just highlighted the bit that is important for you to know for today. But we also want to show that employers have become more confident in hiring and supporting autistic people, and that autistic people's experience of being in work has improved. So historically, there was 16% of autistic people in full-time employment. That figure went up to 22 to 23%. However, latest figures that have come out have said that that is all people, all autistic people. So it's not just full-time employment, but part-time employment as well. And some of the reasons for that, some of the barriers to employment, is the recruitment process, and looking to see what your recruitment process is like. Is it very difficult for anybody to understand and to access? And it could be more difficult for an autistic person to go through. Some people have real problems and issues around whether they disclose on their application form that they're autistic or not. There's a guy that I met quite a few years ago now who was a very affable person, really easy to talk to and get on with. And he had applied for so many jobs and he had disclosed every time that he was autistic. Then he decided he wasn't going to disclose in the application form, and he got an interview for a job. He was then offered the job, and he then disclosed that he was autistic afterwards. And he just found that very strange that the one time when he didn't disclose was the time when people took him at face value and saw the advantages of having him as an employee rather than looking at the disadvantage from seeing that little barrier on the application form. And often that is because people don't understand autism and sort of see barriers of negativity rather than looking at the enablement that autistic people have because of their autism and the strengths that come with that. One of the other barriers, and it's often about retainment of people in the workplace, is that managers and colleagues not understanding autism and not understanding how to support their autistic colleague and how to manage an autistic person. So that again, it's all around to autism training and understanding more about autism and just understanding what the differences are and how some needs can be met, because all of us, autistic or not, we have differences to each other. So it's just understanding what the difference is and I say the enablement, the advantages that person brings to the team and to the workforce. For some people, the barriers are that reasonable adjustments aren't put into place. Some employees do not understand what reasonable adjustments are. And so we're going to be looking at that as we go through today. And then some barriers are clear instructions within the workplace, and especially when a person first starts, when you're going through the induction process, or how you bring everybody into knowing what should be happening within that workday. And again, we're going to be looking at that in a lot more detail as we go through today. So as I said, this is for those of you that have just joined. Sorry, I've just saw the notice that come up there. Annette is my colleague who is working on the background technical stuff. This, for those who've just joined, today is not a training day. This is a very light touch. So to find out about what autism is in detail, I strongly suggest that you really do sort of have somebody in and deliver a proper detailed training session on what autism is. So just to give a light touch, we're going to give an analogy. Here we've got a Microsoft computer and here we've got an Apple computer. Two things that do the same job, but they have very different operating systems. And so this is similar to where you've got a neurotypical brain and you have an autistic brain. It's just two very different operating systems that look at things from different perspectives. And whereas with computers, you've got software that can help one understand the other, this is where a neurotypical person has to find out about autism, try to understand autism, and then so you can step in to the autistic world and see it from their perspective. And for the autistic person, they have to live in the neurotypical world. So for them, it's helping them with strategies and helping them with information to understand the neurotypical world. And Temple Grandin is an American lady, and she's great with this saying, to say that I'm different, not less. Temple Grandin is a very, very successful engineer in America. She also does some talks about autism, but it's just that she sees things from a different perspective to somebody who is neurotypical. And she has a fantastic way of being able to see things in pictures and to be able to work it out in her head, all these fantastic diagrams of how engineering wise you can put a process into being and just come at it from a very different way, in a very detailed way, very quickly, very different to somebody who's neurotypical, where you might take a lot longer to get to that same place. So these are the three main areas of difference. Somebody who is autistic is going to have a lot of differences around social communication and interaction, how you interact with people and how you communicate with people, and the stresses on the social. You can come across somebody who is autistic who will talk about something that they're interested in very, very articulately, being able to talk in great detail and depth and have a fantastic memory for facts. However, when you then start talking about socially side of things, of how are you, I was talking to somebody who their daughter had said, she's a really intelligent person, but she said, if somebody says to me, how are you? I really haven't got a clue what that means. What are they asking me? And when you think about it, how are you? It doesn't really mean a lot. If she was asked, like, college today, were the lessons okay? How were the teachers? Were they talking with you all right? And breaking it down into more factual questions, she'd be able to answer it a lot better. But she's just learned just to say, yeah, I'm fine, thank you. Because that is a social norm of how to reply to that question. But actually, you wouldn't know that she was having difficulties with things because she just replied with a smile on her face because that's what you do and got on with the day. And again, we're going to be going through these in more detail practically about the workplace. Restricted and repetitive behaviours. Often this will stop somebody being flexible in their thinking and quite rigid in how their thought patterns are and how they are going to be structured through the day of things that they are going to do, and might not be able to switch from one subject to another as quickly as somebody who's neurotypical. And they might also have interests in activities that are different to somebody else. It might be interests that they've had for years, and where somebody who is neurotypical might have moved on to something new, they might still have the interests that they had when they were a teenager and still enjoy those teenager interests as well and activities. And then sensory sensitivities come into play as well. Everybody who's on the autistic spectrum is likely to have a difference in one or more of the sensory differences. So I will show you quite quickly as we move through what the sensory system is, but it does affect people every day. So for some tips around communication and interaction, so quite often an autistic person could think about things quite literally. So when you're looking at some of the policies that you have, some of the way that you ask questions, they might be taken literally and they might do something different to what you were expecting. And if you think about the words that you've used, they might be doing exactly what you've asked them to do. It just wasn't what you were meaning to ask them to do. And so there can be often a bit of a misunderstanding just because someone's taking things literally of what is being said. Some people might have difficulty in communicating, interacting face to face with somebody and might prefer to do things by email. Some people really do not like having phone calls, find it a lot harder to have conversations on the phone and would rather maybe do it face to face or again by email. Some people prefer text, even if you're in the same room as each other, because then they've got time to process the information that they can see, rather than having to look at someone and come up with an answer quickly. It might be that they will take longer to process the information that is coming through. In group work, group work can be quite difficult for some autistic people. And so it's making sure that the autistic employee really understands what their role is within the group and also what the roles are of the other people. And looking at timings of when work has to be in within that group work. If somebody is just going to go off for half an hour to do some work, have they been told that that's how long they've got? Or they're expecting that they don't have to bring the work back in till the following day. So being quite specific about what is expected of the person and quite often having that written down somewhere. For an autistic person, they can sometimes take longer to process information, but often it's that they need the information broken down. That if you ask somebody to do three things within one sentence, they might have remembered the first thing, but they've gotten to the second because they're still trying to process what the first thing is that you've asked them to do. You've gotten to the second, then the first one is maybe sort of going out their mind, and by the third, it's like, I've really forgotten what was being asked. And did you want me to do the first one first or the third one first? Or was this, oh, what's going on? When do I need to do all this? So having things written down, it gives them time to process, hence why having things in emails or text is a lot easier for them to then focus what's going through, and even having agendas written down and sent out so that they know exactly what's going to be happening through a meeting. Often when people get settled into the workplace, some of these things you will get to know the person and they will get to know you, and then communications can be a lot easier because they will say what they need. You might have picked up on things that they need, and then it just becomes quite normal, the way of working. For some people who are autistic, they really do not get irony and do not get a sense of humour. So it's really getting to know the person first. It's really good to avoid using irony and metaphors just as like a standard until you get to know the person and to know irony, probably you would still avoid. For some people who've got a sense of humour and understand humour, it's a really great thing to be able to use and a great way of diffusing some situations. But for those who do not get humour, then it's a thing to sort of really try to avoid, because by just trying to sort of like, there was a meeting that somebody was telling me about where it was a quite serious meeting that they had to have with this person, but to put the person at the ease, they made a quip when the person came into the room. But how the autistic person took that quip was that they were having a go at them and they were being really disrespectful, and they actually had to cancel the meeting and hold it on another day. The trust had disappeared straight away just because of this one little quip. So it's just being careful when you do not know the person until you get to know how that person ticks. And as I said, for some people, it can take longer for them to process information. So just be bearing that in mind, that if you ask somebody a question, it might not be that they're ignoring you. It might be that they are just processing what you've asked them, and it might just take them a while to respond. It might be that when you're asking them something, they are processing it, thinking, oh, do they mean this or do they mean that? And as you get to know them and they get to know you, they'll probably be able to say to you, well, I'm not sure what you mean by that. It could be that you mean in this, but it could be that you mean in the other. Please, can you clarify what you're asking me? And then there's the unwritten social rule book. As a neurotypical, as we grow from being a baby into a child and through our lives, we organically learn what the social rule book is of life and what is appropriate, what's inappropriate. But for autistic people, they don't get that organically. They have to learn it by rote. So this is why some people act inappropriately at times. It's because they do not have this as a natural thing to learn. So they have to learn it by rote and from what people are telling them. And it's only when you are talking to somebody who's autistic and helping them with this that you realise that some of our social rules are just downright bonkers. Some really do not compute in the same way in different situations. And some you try to sort of tell them what one rule is, but actually you then find that yeah, it doesn't make that's how you do it now, but actually this afternoon you wouldn't do it that way. And then you learn to you have to keep revisiting. But that is where you've got to give somebody respect for their autism, that it's not that they're trying to be rude, it's not that they're trying to act differently than other people. It's just that they're trying to read the situation and sometimes we'll just get it wrong. And an autistic person really doesn't like to get it wrong. They are trying to copy what other people are doing around them, but sometimes they're just not able to, or they just don't get it. And this is why it can be really hard for them to be around people and interacting because they're scared of getting it wrong again. And they've learned that some people, how they react to them is by calling them names, not being very nice with them. So they then stop interacting with people. So when you are working with somebody, it's remembering to give clear instructions, remembering that people can take things literally. So maybe you would say to somebody, you know, can you have that report finished today? Why are you asking that question? For some people, they will take it quite literally. Yes, I can. No, I can't. That might not be what you're trying to ask. Did you mean that they needed to get that report to you when they finish, but you haven't put that in the question, but you're just thinking that they're going to pick up on that nuance? An autistic person probably won't pick up on that. Were you asking the question, you know, can you get the report finished today? Just asking to see if they could. Or were you politely telling them that actually they have to have the report finished today? So a different way of asking that question could be being just a bit more direct and like, finish the report today and email it to me by 4 o'clock, being quite direct and specific as to what you want them to do with that report. And then they know what they're dealing with. So for restricted and repetitive behaviours, this how this is sort of brought out is that a lot of autistic people will have routines. It's trying to find something that makes that person's life as predictable as possible. An autistic person will be a lot more anxious than a neurotypical person, and their anxiety levels will go up and down through the day, depending on what is triggering them. And so by having routines and putting that predictability there, it makes things a lot easier and a lot less stressful for them because they can anticipate what is going to be happening next. Anything that is unpredictable will make an autistic person's life more anxious, as it can do with a lot of other people as well. but their anxiety tends to rise an awful lot quicker because they're already at a higher anxious level than somebody who's neurotypical. So to help with that, it's putting structure into the working day. And I say, especially when you've got somebody new coming into the job. So do they know when to have a coffee break? Do they know when to have a lunch break? Plan it into the day. If you're going to have a catch-up meeting with them, make sure they know in advance what timings those will be. If you need to change, say you've got a manager's supervisory meeting with an employee, and it's going to be at 3 o'clock this afternoon. And so you've come into this now and you've realised that, oh, actually, it would be good to catch up with somebody after this, but that will take me until 3:30. Let the person know as soon as possible that that meeting is going to be running later so that they can process the information and change what they're going to be doing as well. Last minute changes are the thing that really throw an autistic person out of their predictable routine. And so it's given as much warning as possible to help ease that off and ease that anxiety. If it's possible, give advanced agendas for meetings, even if it is a catch-up meeting. It's still good to know what is going to be discussed and itemised down in an agenda, email to the person beforehand so they know what is going to be happening as that meeting goes through. And try and give people guidance, especially when they're new to the role, of how meetings operate and what their role is within that meeting. If you are in a group of colleagues that you meet with very often, maybe weekly, and you work together quite closely and you all get on with each other, you've worked together a lot of years, going into that meeting, it might be a bit more laid back a meeting than if you go to a meeting with the suited and booted at the higher echelons of an organisation, where you have to be a lot more on your guard. It's a lot more formal meeting. But for somebody who's autistic, if they're going into a meeting and think, well, this is how meetings work, they will act the same, whichever that meeting is. So it's giving them guidance on what they need to do in that meeting. Is it a meeting that they need to speak in? Do they need to prepare something to talk about? Or is it a meeting they're taking notes in and just listening to what's going on? Or can they ad hoc talk as they've got a question as to whatever the subjects are that's been discussed? So it's just giving that guidance beforehand so that they know what the appropriate thing is, remembering the social rule book that we all sort of work around. And then timetabling regular catch-ups with the line manager, and so that they know what is going on, looking at what how they are planning their work going forward. And it can be that this has to be revisited quite often, especially again with a new employee, so that they know what is expected, what the timelines are for the work. Having a regular catch-up means that you can pick up on some issues before they become problems. There's somebody that I know who he managed an autistic person in a job where they were outside. It was a music festivals, and the nature of music festivals, you're obviously outside in fields. And so the autistic person, when they did one job, they were able to sort of have a walk around before they were going on to the next job because it was all outside. This then moved to where they were working in an office in London for the same festivals, but they were working within the office environment. Once the autistic person came into the office, the manager realised how often this guy needed to have a break from sitting in a desk because he just couldn't sit still for very long. And that hadn't been that noticeable when he was in an outside job because he could walk around quite easily and still be able to concentrate. But when he was in the office and he was getting up and having a walk around, other members of staff were then saying, you know, he's not doing his work properly because he keeps having these breaks. We don't get breaks. This doesn't seem to be fair. So we had a chat, the line manager and I, of how he could structure that day. So maybe he was sitting at his desk for 20 minutes doing some work. And then instead of just having a stroll around, part of his role was then to take any post to where the post had to go to. Photocopy needed doing at certain times, photocopy needed collecting at certain times. So instead of just being walking around, he was given tasks to do as he was walking around. So he was still working. He was actually helping some of his colleagues because he was doing some of the jobs that didn't have to take time out to do anymore. And it was just trying to find a way, and there were reasonable adjustments within the workplace to help him with his needs, but also in a way that worked for the job that he was doing as well. So these would all sort of come to light within these catch-ups with the line manager and trying to look outside the box as to how needs need to be met in a way that worked. And as I say, that is all part of the reasonable adjustments. So it's just remembering that an autistic person may not be able to be as flexible due to this restricted thought pattern. So if you want them to move on to something else, just because you've realised that actually this thing is doing now, so please can you put that to one side and do this? It might be a bit more difficult for an autistic person to be that flexible. So you might need to say, in 30 minutes time, could you finish what you're doing just so that you can finish this for me because I need this one finished today, and just be a bit more flexible with them. To bear in mind that they might not be able to move over as quick from one task to another. If someone has an intense interest, and it's not everybody who is autistic who has an intense interest in something, but there are quite a lot of autistic people who will be really, really interested in something and love talking about it. Sometimes if they're talking too much, you actually have to say, well, it's really nice to talk to you about this, but I now need to get on with what I'm doing. However, if somebody has got an intense interest and you are finding that they're getting really anxious in the workplace, that is something to start talking to them about, and it can really help them to de-stress and to just come down to a lot less anxious level, because it's something that they feel comfortable in and comfortable talking about. And it's a time when it can be used really positively with the person. It's also, if they've got an intense interest, it's a great way to start getting to know them when they're joining the company. And it could be that through that intense interest, you might find some things that they do within that is really useful to know for the job that they're doing. And it might be some transferable skills that can be used. And then it's also, if you're looking at the bit at the bottom and looking at the two guys looking at, is that a 6 or is it a 9? Quite often when there's misunderstandings between people, it's because they're looking at things from a different perspective. And if you can try to look at it from the opposite perspective, you might then start to see where they're coming from and why they are looking at it differently to how you are. And going back to what Temple Grandin says, I am different, not less. It's just that two people are looking at things differently. It doesn't mean to say that one is right and one is wrong. It's just a different look. And so actually, sometimes by looking at it from a different perspective, it might bring a different solution to an issue that you're dealing with. And it's like, wow, you've actually got there quicker than I could have done because you're looking at it from a different way. And so sometimes it can be really, really useful. So I'm not going to go into this at all in detail because I say you really need to have somebody in to deliver the training so that you can understand all this properly. But it's just to show you that, we have 8 senses that impact us all the time. And the differences are that somebody can be hyper oversensitive to things or hyper undersensitive. And if somebody, for example, is hypersensitive to hearing, they might be hearing noises way over the other side of the office that's happening that you can't even hear. And they're not able then to filter out these things that they are hypersensitive to be able to concentrate on something that is happening in front of them. So there was a guy that I knew who worked for a large company for years, and he was in a room on his own working. He was not diagnosed with autism at the time, and he had a really high turnover of work. He was really, really good at what he was doing. And after years, for some reason, which I don't understand, how they were working changed, and this other person was brought into the office that he was working in, and he said this person was a bit of like a social butterfly, had the door open, come in and have a coffee, come in and have a chat about what's been going on over the weekend. And instead of working in this quiet environment, he was suddenly working in this very noisy environment and having somebody talking all the time. The workload that he was doing, his output went down significantly. He just could not concentrate anymore on what he was doing because he wasn't able to filter out the noise that was happening from this other chap working there and who was on the phone talking to other people, inviting people in all the time. And so his workload went down. So this is when actually he then started to seek a diagnosis because other people had said, there's a possibility that he could be autistic. So he actually got a diagnosis, and then there was reasonable adjustments were able to be put into place. And actually he was then put back to working on his own. His work output went right back up again. But without that diagnosis, he wouldn't have legally been able to ask for those reasonable adjustments to be able to put in. But these senses are there all the time. And it's quite often if you see somebody acting differently to what they have been doing, it's good to do a mental audit of the sensory world to see if something has changed. And I often say when we're doing training with teachers, when children come back to school in September, and there must be a lot of sensory stuff going on because through the summer holidays is when all the decorating gets done. And by the time they come back, there must be such a smell of paint within a school, and as well as different colours that from a visual perspective, things might have changed. And so it's something that to bear in mind because it will impact people all day, every day, and in different ways all day, every day. And stimming. Stimming is when sometimes you see people flapping or rocking. There are different ways of stimming, and it is a repetitive movement that you would not stop somebody doing. And it's often used as a self-calming technique. Sometimes people stim because they're really, really excited and they can't hold their excitement in. And so it comes out in a visual way of where they start stimming. There was a lady that I met not that long ago. I don't know if you can see, I've got a book here. It's really hard with this thing, with a like an elastic thing on the back. And she would just start flicking that when she was sat in a meeting, or quite quietly flick it, because she found that that was an acceptable way of stimming just by flicking something. Sometimes you see people with that they'll have elastic bands around the wrist for different reasons. But for somebody who needs to stim, just even twanging on something like that can be a way of them stimming that is more acceptable than suddenly in a meeting, just suddenly rocking and flapping, and that they will find a different way of doing that. But it's just something that somebody will do as a self-calming technique when things are maybe getting a little bit stressful. And I say sometimes it is just someone is so excited and they can't hold it in. And so suddenly there'll be this where maybe you want to go like, oh, wow, isn't this brilliant? But because you know the social root book of life, you think, I can't do that in this circumstance. For somebody who doesn't understand that or is just not able to hold it all in, suddenly something will come out, which I think is probably quite freeing. So this is looking at the positives, because often you can be looking at the negative side of having somebody who is autistic in the workforce. There are a lot of positives there, and you can find this on the internet. It's been done by the University of Leeds, and it's a great poster to have up because it does highlight so many strengths. And there's companies that I've worked with where they're in the cybersecurity world, quite often now they are positively seeking autistic people because they've realised that the autistic brain can get through some of the barriers quickly, a lot quicker than somebody who's neurotypical. There's another company who they started employing neurodiverse people because they were coming up with issues that the guy at the head of this firm had thought that if we have a neurodiverse workforce, then you've got a lot more different types of brains looking at a problem, and you're going to come up with a lot more solutions rather than just having one type of brain looking at a problem. You're going to come up with one type of solution. And what that started off with as a trial actually turned out to be very economically beneficial for that company, who went from strength to strength, and they have continued to employ a neurodiverse work field. So hopefully you can see that you'll be able to see that all this is being saved online to be able to see later. But say if you look at University of Leeds, Autism the Positives, you'll be able to download the poster and be able to put it up at work so that you can see what some of these strengths are. And then understanding your autistic employee, we've got a couple of saying heres that have come up from people who we support locally. And one person said that they have difficulty picking up social cues and difficulty in knowing what to do when I get things wrong. And the social cues, some people who are autistic can't read body language and facial expression. And we often use those things for indicating social cues. So if somebody is not able to read any of that, they can't pick up those nuances of like, is it my turn now to do something? When is it my turn to speak? If you have somebody you're in conversation with, and in the middle of that conversation, you just stop talking while you're trying to think of what the next thing is to say, so you have a little bit of quiet. The autistic person might think, oh, now it's my turn to speak because they've stopped. And it seems like they're interrupting you, but actually it's just that they're not just picking up on those social cues. And somebody else said that they emailed their manager on their first day at work to express their needs and said they were heard. The manager had some knowledge of autism, which was helpful and actually made a difference as to how going forward in that workplace the experience was for them. So for those of you working in HR, recruitment, is your process easy to understand? Is it something that you've looked at to see for somebody who doesn't understand recruitment processes? Is it something that is easily accessible? If they are filling in an application form online, is it clear where they've got to fill in? And actually, is there enough room there? Because I know with some that I've worked on, sometimes it's like easier to sort of do it in a Word document and then send it off that way than some of the online forms. Are the instructions and the questions clear? Do they say what they mean? Sometimes you need to be, for an autistic person, just direct. Yesterday, we were going through some assessment questions with a group of autistic people, and the first question started off, please, can you? And they're going, they just need to say, what is, not please, can you, and be all nice and friendly. It's actually, we don't need the pleases. It just is be clear and direct. And do you offer reasonable adjustments when someone discloses their disability? Is that something that you naturally would think of doing when that disability is there? And I'm hoping that things have changed, because I can remember somebody maybe about 10 years ago now saying that they'd applied for a job, and when it said, have you a disability? And they said yes, they got an email back saying, well, we've got ramps, we've got this, we've got the other. They didn't actually ask what the disability was, and actually it wasn't a physical disability that they had. And just at the bottom of this slide here, this is from a firm who they had some autistic employees, and they were trying to recruit more, so because they're, again, a very different company to the one I mentioned earlier. They were looking at a diverse workforce. So they looked at how their recruitment process was and what needed to be changed. So they consulted with their autistic employees, and they created a different recruitment process that was a lot clearer and a lot more direct to access. And they did it. They reviewed it 12 months later and changed a few things and reviewed it again. And then the HR team said, why are we running two different processes? The new one that we've put into place is working so much better. It is a lot clearer to understand, a lot simpler to work through. And so they discarded the old one that they'd had for donkey's years. So quite often, when you are putting something into place for an autistic person, it's actually something that is better for everybody, because it is just more understandable, really, more clear to understand. So it's just something worth looking at. With your induction, when somebody new comes into the workplace, do you have a clear induction process? Do you have maybe a list of things that they need to be looking at doing that they can tick off as they go through? If you do that, then they are a lot more aware and can process things as they need to, rather than trying to have to remember, oh, where do I look for these things? Do you have a lot of policies that they have to read through? Instead of saying, well, can you go and look at the policy file, but actually you don't need to do this one or that one because that doesn't go with your job. Actually give them a list of the policies that they need to look through, and then they can tick them off as they've done them. And then when you have your next review meeting, they're able to give it back to you and show what they've been done. Do you give information on where the toilets are, when and where to get a coffee, what's lunchtime? Somebody that I knew, they were saying that their autistic employee had been at lunchtime, was staying in the office. They had an hour for lunch and was staying in the office for that hour. So they said to them one day, you know, you don't need to stay in the office. You can go outside and like go to the shops or whatever. You don't need to be in the office. So the next day, the manager noticed that the autistic employee wasn't in the office during lunchtime. A few days later, the manager had gone out and he was coming back to the office about 15 minutes before this lunchtime would have come to an end, and saw the autistic employee standing outside the building, and he kept looking at his watch and looking at his watch. So the manager said to him, you know, what are you doing? He's going, oh, you told me I should go out at lunchtime. And so how he'd taken that was very literal, and he'd gone out for the hour. And so he was standing outside waiting for the hour to pass before he could go back into the building. So that had to be revisited as to that he doesn't need to be out for the whole hour. He can maybe go out and look at a shop and come back in. And so you've just got to review these things as things come up, and just make sure that people are understanding and not being that literal with what you've been saying to them. If your building is a complex, is a map offered so that people can start to understand their way around. If an autistic person doesn't like interacting with people that they don't know, if they get lost, they might not want to ask somebody how to get to wherever it is that they're working. So by having a map, they can be a bit more independent of being able to figure out, or even giving them some idea of people who they can talk to as they're getting to know the building. You know, who is the best place, or who is a mentor, or here is my phone number. So you can ring me or text me to say where you are, and then I can guide you back to where our office is. So it's just looking at what works for the person. And it's just putting the person at the centre of that and making sure everything is individualised, personalised to them. Do you offer a mentoring or a buddy system? And this is the person who they could be ringing to say, help, you know, I'm on the third floor, I'm at the so-and-so, I don't know how to get back to wherever it is. Or, you know, my manager asked me this today. I don't really understand what they were meaning. Can you tell me, does this mean that I've got to do this, or does it mean this? And sometimes it's easier to ask somebody who is a mentor rather than asking the manager. So it's best not to have the manager as that mentor, to have somebody quite different. And when we're looking at reasonable adjustments, this is something that came out of the Equality Act 2010, and it is something about making it a level playing field. So if you look like in the first picture there, you know, they've all been given a box to stand on, but actually the person on the left doesn't need that box because they can see over the fence quite easily without having a box, whereas the other two need boxes and the little one needs two boxes. So it's just putting things so they're equal. It's a level playing field. You're not treating the person with a disability better, giving them an advantage. It's making sure that they're on the same level playing field as a person who doesn't need the reasonable adjustments. So these are some examples of reasonable adjustments. So open plan offices. If the desk that is empty when the person starts is bang in the middle of the office and right next to the photocopier and maybe near an air cooler, that is going to be a very noisy desk to be on. And actually, there might be better to be at a desk at the back and to one side. Again, reasonable adjustments are very personal, and so it's knowing and talking with the person as to what works better for them. Hot desking is a real hard thing for somebody who's autistic. Some autistic people don't like other people touching their things. They don't like touching other things that people have touched. And so for some people, they might need to have their own desk that they know which is their desk to go and sit in when they're going to work. And quite often with hot desking, I'm sure a lot of you will be aware, you go in and it's really hard to find space, that all the desks are being taken up. So for an autistic person who likes predictability, that could be a really scary thing to be going in to do. Is it possible for some people to work from home part of the week and to go into the office for part of the week? And obviously, out of COVID, a lot of this flexible working is now a lot easier to implement. For some people, it's travelling to and work outside the rush hours. So if they're using public transport, it's a lot easier to get on the trains and buses when there's not so many people on there. So it's just working with them and trying to find out what works best for them. They'll still be working the hours that they need to work. It's just maybe being a bit more flexible with how that's done. They may need their instructions given to them in a written format, so that they can process one at a time and do one task before they move on to the next task. And whereas, if I'm sitting in a meeting and it's like, oh, can you do this, that, the other, I'm scribbling away like anything. It might be harder for an autistic person to be able to write that fast as they're processing the information and writing it down. So if instructions can be given in a written format, that could be easier for them. You remembering to allow processing time when asking questions or giving instructions and having patience for that answer to come back, and especially when it's a busy time and you yourself are stressed out, and it's trying to keep calm yourself when otherwise that stress is going to get passed over to the other person as well. The provision of edge such as screen reading software, looking at what could be done that way that makes it better. And also for some people, having white backgrounds can be a no-no. It might be that they need maybe a yellow background or cream background to use. Any alterations to the premises, sometimes, some people can't afford to do that, especially with smaller companies. But it's just looking to see what you can do with the building you've got as well, as to whether, again, if you think of an open plan office, just being able to put a screen up so that it's still open plan, but they're screened off so they've got some privacy. It could be something as simple as that. Looking at the workplace policies and making sure that they're fit for purpose, that they actually say what they mean. You could have somebody who's getting really irate because the person working next to them, they can see them on the shopping channels buying shoes when they're supposed to be working. So it's like, oh, that means that I can go and do some shopping, and then they get into trouble for it. If you can direct them back to what the policy is about using the internet while they're at work, it's a lot easier then for them to understand what needs to be done. If the policy is that in your lunch hour, you are able to use your work laptop to do some shopping, that's fine, but you cannot do it during your working hours. And looking at the duties that job is that they've got, once a person starts, if there's one that they're having problems with, is it something that has to be in that job specification? Is it one that can be moved over to somewhere else and something else brought into their job specification? It's just looking to see how it works for the company as well. And then also allowing time off for medical appointments, which I'm sure you do already. So here are some tips to support your autistic employee. So clarify what the expectations of the job is. Often, the job description, and then when you start physically doing the job, can just seem to be a bit different. So just making sure that the person knows what the expectations are. Provide training and mentoring for that person, so that they know what they're doing, any training that they need for the role that they get, but also that mentoring is there so that they have somebody to talk to, so they can get clarification from somebody. Remember to make any instructions concise and clear, and that they have got that well-structured work environment, that they know what they're supposed to be doing, when they're supposed to be doing it. Also, sometimes an autistic person, that they can be so focused on what they're doing, which is such an advantage, because somebody who's neurotypical can get distracted a lot easier. The downside of somebody being really focused on what they're doing is their job might finish at 5 o'clock and they might still be there at 7 o'clock, because they want to finish what they're doing and they are so engrossed in it. So it's making sure that you've got the safety nets in there to help that person know when it is the end of the working day, and that they will have to come back to it the next day, because it is actually time for them to go home, and looking out for their health and welfare because of that. Also, from a sensory perspective, there's one of the senses called interception. And if somebody's got poor interception, they might not know when they're hungry and they might not know when they're thirsty. So it might be, for somebody like that, one way of supporting the person is to be able to send them texts saying it's time to go and get a coffee, or time to go and get a drink. It's lunchtime, it's time to eat. And just reminding them, because their bodies aren't going to be telling them that they're hungry or that they're thirsty. When you're reviewing their performance, you need to look at things that are going wrong, but also things that are going well. And at the end of the review, make sure that you finish the review with the positives, so that you deal with the things that need looking at and needing changing first, the things that have gone wrong, but making sure that the positives, the things that they've done right, that they go out, because a lot of autistic people have got very low self-esteem. So you're trying to build that self-esteem up all the time. Ask them about any sensory distractions, so that you are able to deal with that before there's issues that their workload isn't working very well. They might be aware of some straight away, of things that need to be changed. And helping other staff to be more aware. And this is going back to training, of if people understand how an autistic brain works, then they will be a lot more patient with that autistic person, and they might have a lot more respect for their autism, and actually, just looking at different perspectives of how things are looked at within the workplace. So we're just coming to the end now. So this is just a useful links page. So the Equality Act 2010, to be able to go and look to see what that is if you don't know it already. There is a thing called access to work. And if you have, so I'm just going to read that bit there, where it's a government funded programme, but it means that employers, on behalf of the autistic employee, can request funding for example, autism awareness training for colleagues, training for managers, so that they are more effective managers for the autistic employee. If you want any help with this, if you ring our inquiry helpline, we have some employment support workers who will be able to help guide you through this. And then Beyond Autism, they've got a great list there of some examples of reasonable adjustments that are worth looking at. So they're just some useful links for you to look at. And then on here, these are just our contact details. If you are after some training, there are other training providers, but we've got a training team. And that's, so if you just email training@autismbeds.org, they will get back to you about any training